Good morning, Big Rapids. This is Big Rapids Buzz with Chris Long and
Bruce Borkovich. Morning.
Good morning.
You know, every time you do that, it reminds me of Good Morning Vietnam. I keep waiting for you to do that, but that's not what we're doing.
Yeah. Today's a little different. You got extra people in the room. We've never really had more than one other person in the room.
We haven't. You know, we look for these opportunities to get interesting guests, and this is going to be fantastic. We have a longtime friend and colleague of mine, Tony Leonard. And Tony, rather than me go on about you, just tell everyone a little bit about yourself.
Thank you, Bruce. And thank you, Chris. And as we all know, I could speak for ages about myself, but I know we're under some time constraints. I'm Tony Leonard. I'm a detective with the Grand Rapids Police Department. You and I met many moons ago when I was working for the Mount Pleasant Police Department. I was there for just under 7 years, and I've been with Grand Rapids for a few more than that years, since March of 2005.
Wow.
I had a few different specialized units in Mount Pleasant, and I've had the opportunity to work in some specialized units in Grand Rapids as well. I was a patrol officer. I worked night shift. I worked day shift. I was a community officer, currently a detective, as I said, and also had the opportunity to work on the homeless outreach team.
And that's what we're really going to focus on.
Yep, that's boilerplate of why we're here.
Yeah, and you have a partner next to you, and she's got a pretty interesting place in all this. Chrissy, tell everyone who you are and a little bit about yourself.
Thank you for having me. So my name is Chrissy Rikowskas. I am a clinical social worker. And prior to working alongside with GRPD, I was a clinical social worker for community mental health, also known as Network 180 in Kent County, Michigan. So I have 20 years of clinical experience working with individuals ranging of all ages, working with mental health, substance use, developmental disabilities, all kinds of issues in the past, working with people. And so, yeah.
Boy, would you get along well with our local Emily Bongard. She reminds me a lot of you, and she's just wonderful.
I greatly appreciate you guys driving all the way up from Grand Rapids and coming to talk with us.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
This is a big deal, and this is a topic of great interest in this community. Even though we're a smaller community, we're still dealing with an influx of the homeless, and
which is getting worse every single.
It does seem.
I moved here 7 years ago, as everybody knows, and I always keep saying all the time. But we didn't have this problem as we do now.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about why that may be. We've got some pretty experienced people here, so why don't you let's start with Tony and tell us about the unit at Grand Rapids Police Department. We're going to say GRPD a lot tonight, folks. Yep. That's Grand Rapids Police Department. Tell us about that unit in your experience or your assignment. We'll dig deeper into your experience, but your assignment there.
So it was a hybrid team, and it was comprised of police officers, firefighters from GRFD, the Fire Department of Grand Rapids, but then we also had clinicians from Network 180, and we also had substance abuse coaches to aid in our outreach in our times going out and meeting with people, sometimes on busy street corners, sometimes out in the woods, oftentimes along the riverbanks. We're finding the camps and going out and providing the resources that we could. I got started on the team. I came from our community engagement unit, or our community policing unit, which was primarily a strict enforcement. And I knew many of the homeless people that were out there, mostly because I had written them tickets and arrested them countless times over and over and over again. And we saw there was almost a backlash from residents and business owners and the neighborhood organizations, because if I responded to Borkovich Widget's house or factory, and you called and said, Officer Leonard, there's a homeless guy out back and he's rifling through my dumpster and he's peeing in my back lot and I don't want him here. And I would get there the first time and I would warn him. And then the following day I get a text or a call from you and you say, hey, this same guy is back, and same thing. He's peeing in my back lot and he's rifling through my dumpster and I want him gone. That second time I'd probably give him another talking to, maybe write him a ticket. Well, the third and fourth times that you're calling me, I'm taking this guy to jail. And I take him to jail, and it's a trespassing charge. It's a low bond. It's not a significant crime. And then he bonds out and he goes right back to Borkovich Widgets. And then you call me again and say, Officer Leonard, what in the heck's going on here? This guy just came, I've called you 5 or 6 times. You just took this guy to jail and he's right back here. And then I would respond back and I'd either write this guy a ticket or I'd take him to jail again and wash, rinse, repeat. The following day or two, guess what? Same guy is in the back lot of Borkovich Widgets. And here I am again. And it gets to the point where you just stop calling. Yeah. And your frustration as a business owner is almost projected onto the police because you think, why am I wasting my time?
Yep.
Why am I calling you when nothing is getting resolved?
Yeah. And then from a police perspective, when you're doing that, you're not answering more serious crime or possibly preventing crime.
Correct. And as a police administrator, one of the things that annoys you most are repeat calls. Why is this problem not getting resolved? Absolutely. What are you doing or what are you not doing that is causing us to continue to come back to this same location for the same reason, for the same person?
Absolutely. Yeah. And you'll agree with me when I say historically, police are very parochial. Hey, this is the way we do things. Right. We got it. I'm in control. Mm-hmm. And at a certain point in time, Chrissy, I think we started to look at things a little differently and say, it's not that we, the police, are doing anything wrong, but we, the police, we're not making a difference. The business owner's mad. I'm not out preventing crime or answering other calls or whatever. And tell us about the evolution.
Bruce, real quick, let me finish.
Sure.
How I got into the unit.
Sure. Sorry.
I had done that for years, and I realized I'm spinning my wheels. And as were the other officers in my unit, we were not making a difference. We were resolving the issue very, very short term, but it was anecdotal. I mean, it was not solving the problem. So when that opportunity presented itself, I kind of thought maybe it's time for me to take a different approach to this. And maybe there's something else we could be doing to prevent this same guy from going to the back lot of Borkovich Widgets.
Yeah. And knowing you like I do, this was a little bit of a challenge. This was thrown down a gauntlet. Mm-hmm. This isn't working. And I've got to try something different. You're not the type of person to say, this isn't working, I'm just going to go do something else.
No.
And that's you're type A, and that's why we need you so much. But that's my observation, knowing you since 1998.
What is the main makeup of why they keep? Is it mental health, or is it they just don't learn, they don't care? What is there no consequences, or like?
Chris, that's a great question. I'll defer to Chrissy for the clinical side of that, but from a law enforcement perspective, one, they don't care. The penalties are negligible. The fines and costs, they're simply not going to pay them. It's more of an inconvenience for them. They'll get arrested. They know these are not inherently dangerous crimes. They're getting low bond or no bond at all. They're getting fast tracked, and they're getting released within a few hours. In a department the size of Grand Rapids, in a county the size of Kent County, the sheriff's department, they don't want to house inmates that are low-level offenders any more than those offenders want to be there. And if the sheriff's department has the opportunity to release them to create bed space for more violent offenders, the sheriff's department is going to do that. And that's certainly not a knock against them. I mean, it's a sheer numbers position. They just can't take every single nuisance crime violator and house them for a month. It's just not possible.
Absolutely. So, Chrissy, enter the world of our social workers. How did this thing start? Was there a person who started this, or tell me how this thing happened? Because again, police are very parochial.
But
we got
real
this.
Quick. Let's remind everybody what this is in case they're just tuning in.
Chrissy's going to describe it. I'd butcher it. So Chrissy's going to talk about the team.
I will talk about.
She's going to talk about the team that they put together.
The program. So in July of 2022, myself and at that time Officer Smith, we had started a pilot program between Grand Rapids Police Department and Network 180 to address the significant amount of mental health and substance use calls within the Grand Rapids jurisdiction. So historically, there's, I'm not sure how many calls are mental health or substance use related, probably quite a fair amount. And officers are spending a lot of time on these calls, and they don't necessarily know the system or what services to offer. And so this program kind of came about to address these calls. And what it does is it pairs myself with a GRPD officer. We are in the car, for an entire shift. And what we do is we go to any call that has any sort of mental health or substance use component. And the goal is to try to come up with a solution, to whatever the call may be. It could be a domestic call. It could be a welfare check. It could be a trespassing call, a VCSA call, suicide threat, suicide attempt. And so we're able to come in, the officers can clear the scene, make sure that everything is safe. And then I can come in kind of as that supporting cast to determine what is the next step in terms of mental health or substance use. What I have learned is all these officers are really great at de-escalating. That's kind of their primary job. You guys come in, you de-escalate a situation. Then I can come in with my mental health and substance use background and say, okay, let's come up with a plan. We can take you to community mental health. We can take you to your case manager. We can take you to the sobering center. So we can come up with alternative options for these individuals.
Tony's the emergency room doctor and you're the surgeon.
Yes.
Yeah.
Tony gets there and stops the bleeding and makes sure there's an open airway.
Yes.
And then you come in and become surgical based on your training.
Yes.
You mentioned Network 180, and what is that? And then what is the name of this program?
Yeah. So Network 180 is essentially Kent County Community Mental Health.
Okay.
Every county has their own CMH, and then Network 180 is for Kent County.
Okay.
We call the program, it's basically just the GRPD co-response program. It's still kind of in that pilot stage. I think we're kind of treading to changing it to core, but currently we call it co-response.
Did you guys take this program from another department, or is this your guys' own creating, or is there other places doing the same thing?
A lot of other jurisdictions are doing it. Everybody does it a little bit differently. So, some of them, the social worker will dispatch separately. We kind of felt that it needs to be a partnership between the social worker and the officer. And so the officer is driving to the scene. I'm able to look up the individual, determine before we even get there, these are what our options are going to be, so we can be discussing the case while we're on our way there.
And this is different from I've seen online this idea of community policing, that there's some officers, at least the popular one down in Arkansas, I think his name is Tony or something as well. And he's all about this community police. It looks good, but this is different than that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is very different. Community policing has been a buzzword for what good cops have done for 100 years. But this is a little different. So one at a time, Chrissy, let's start with you. Do you have some specialized training then for this particular unit? I know you have a master's degree in social work, but is there a specialized school or training for this particular unit?
Unfortunately, there is not, simply because this is just kind of a new thing. Historically, social workers one way, police one way.
Yeah,
and
very true.
Historically, the two have not worked together. They have kind of worked against each other in some ways.
Very true.
And so when I was approached about this job in 2022, I felt like GRPD is reaching out. They're looking for somebody to help them on these calls. And I felt like I want to be part of that change. And at the end of the day, we're still working with the same individuals.
Absolutely.
Now I'm just kind of on the streets supporting the officers while they're out there and trying to get these people, the services and the treatment that we need, but also prevent uses of force, prevent people from going to jail, coming up with solutions, reducing call volume, reducing that recidivism rate.
Absolutely.
You're essentially right there on the front lines rather than the sidelines that
Absolutely.
it typically is.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And I have to wear a bulletproof vest.
Oh, I was just going to ask that.
Sure. Sure.
So, and I'll chime in and say, contrary to what we see on TV or in movies, I mean, it's not glitzy and glamorous. I mean,
it is not.
No.
We don't, Chrissy is not going to be in a situation where she is in any type of danger.
Right.
She's not going to be she's not a hostage rescue person.
Yep.
She's not, talking somebody out of throwing a handgun down. Chrissy would never be, or any of the social workers would never be put in a position where her safety is
Right.
compromised.
Right.
And when I say it's not glamour and glitz, if the police are called, it's because you're dealing with someone who is highly symptomatic. They are having an atrocious day.
Absolutely.
And they're being disruptive. They are threatening self-harm.
Yeah.
The family has called and said, they're inconsolable. They're out of control. They're breaking things. They're threatening to harm themselves. Once the police get there, we realize that it's it's a stable environment. Chrissy will come in and we're talking about, there are tears shed and, people are, that it's one of their worst days. So,
absolutely. I've talked with people about this before, even in public forums. And back in Chrissy, I'm going to butcher the dates, but I think in the 70s when the concept of mainstreaming came in, very well intentioned to take people who were being institutionalized by the state and get them out and try and get them into the world and a chance at a real life. And I think it was very well intentioned. The net result in many cases was we took people who had serious mental health problems and some addiction problems back then, but primarily mental health problems, took them out of a safe environment, very restricted, but a safe environment, put them on the street so they could be, quote, unquote, mainstreamed. And then sometime between that day and 10 years later, on the worst day of their life, the very worst day of their life, when they have their total meltdown, who gets called? It's a cop. It's not a politician. Back then, it wasn't a social worker because they weren't responding to the street. It wasn't anyone else. It was a police officer. And so police officers back then with very minimal training with mental health, people with mental health issues and addiction issues, show up to someone who's having the worst day of their life. And in a split second, those cops had to make decisions about their own safety, the safety of the public, and the safety of the disturbed person. And sometimes that escalated to use of force and sometimes deadly force. And then, of course, hindsight's 2020. The politicians and the attorneys have 6, 8, 12 months or 2 years to critique what the officer did when they were dealing with someone on the very worst day of their life. How's that, Tony? Is that pretty close?
Very accurate. And the reality of it is, excuse me, the people that were released as they're dealing with law enforcement, they're put right back into a restrictive environment. It's just, instead of a hospital dealing with having nurses and doctors and social workers around them, they're jail bailiffs. They were just taken into custody. And that was honestly the only solution we had at that, and for a very long time. And I think I think progressive police administrators and city managers and politicians are realizing that people that are mentally ill, people that are homeless, jail is not the best option for them. It's not. Some people, they should go to jail. They're well aware of their actions. They understand the consequences. They need to be held accountable. But someone who's mentally ill and is symptomatic because of it, jail is not the right place for them.
Absolutely.
It's just going to perpetuate the issue.
Where it would be the correct place.
In the care of somebody like with the credentials of Chrissy, or at any one of the number of mental health institutions in Kent County. But sometimes it's going back home. Yeah. And oftentimes it's a matter of dealing with and again, I don't want to speak for the clinical side of it, but I saw this a number of times where it was just a matter of just tweaking the medication just a little bit, whether it's taking it earlier in the day, taking a little bit more of it, making sure you're properly hydrated while taking it. It would not take much for someone to get thrown off when they're supposed to be dosing their medication, and their behavior could change quickly.
If jail's not the right option, and then the institutions are, who pays for those institutions? Especially if they're homeless, they don't have health care most likely, or if they do, it's who pays for that?
Yeah, so we can typically like Medicaid funds, general fund dollars. So a lot of individuals were able to help assist them and get them on insurance so they can get some type of health care, typically Medicaid. And we make sure that they can get the treatment that they need. So even if they have no insurance, community mental health is there to make sure that they get what they need and they wouldn't get billed.
When they're dealing with community mental health, here's what doesn't happen. We're sorry. We know you're having the worst day of your life, but we saw that you don't have insurance, so we don't have a place
right.
For
Well,
it.
yeah.
And
in hospitals, if you don't have insurance, they will still. They have to take care of you. Now, they might not go to all the extents, but yeah,
and that's why CMH
it's a
is
common
awesome.
misconception that most people think.
Yep. Tony, did you get some specialized training for this?
You know, I did not. I think I was a good match for this just because I had so much experience with the homeless population, specifically on the west side of Grand Rapids, where I was a community officer for so many years. I literally dealt with these men and women on virtually a daily basis.
Yeah.
I mean, several of them, I knew their full names. I knew their birthdays. I could see a silhouette of them in a security video and tell you, yep, that's so-and-so, without a doubt.
So when you say the west side of Grand Rapids, because some people don't really go down to Grand Rapids from here all the time, what is the boundaries would you call west side of Grand Rapids?
So Grand Rapids has 5 service districts. My expertise or my time as a community officer was on the west side. So that's basically everything west of the Grand River.
Okay.
Yep.
Makes sense.
So if you're coming
I
down
assume
from,
that,
if
but
you're
I
coming
didn't
down
know.
from Big Rapids, pretty much when you hit Ann Street, if you look to the right, that was my area.
I see.
So, Tony, what made you decide to work with homeless? Was it what I said earlier? Was it kind of a personal Tony Leonard challenge?
That was
what
part of
I've
it.
been doing isn't working. There's got to be something better.
There's got to be a different way of doing this.
Yeah.
There has to be.
Yeah.
Because this is not working.
Yeah.
I mean, it was the epitome of wash, rinse, repeat.
Yeah.
It was cyclical, and frankly, I was done doing it.
Yeah.
Because it was incredibly frustrating dealing with the same people at the same addresses for the same reasons.
Yeah. Yeah. Chrissy, did you have any of those aha moments when you paired up and maybe dealt with some folks on a daily basis that you don't typically deal with? Some maybe an increase in severity, or were there any of those shocking moments for you, or were you pretty much accustomed to?
I feel like I was pretty much accustomed to it, just having worked in community mental health for so long. A lot of these people I actually knew, and it was kind of nice to be able to meet them on the streets, because I would say, oh yeah, I remember you from, 5, 10, 15 years ago. And so I felt like I already had an established rapport with some of these individuals. So none of it's really been all too shocking for me.
Yeah.
I kind of thrive on the chaos and I enjoy doing it.
You're an action junkie a little bit, like
a little bit, yeah.
Yeah, that's good. So this is going to really change channels. When you got into this, I had to, once in a while, had to break your heart dealing with certain individuals. Maybe they reminded you of a family member, or it hit home for a personal reason, or you had a certain tug. That's got to be tough.
Yeah. And I think, a lot of this job too is kind of meeting the individual where they're at. And I'm sure Tony can speak to that too. Like, there are some individuals who have struggled with alcohol addiction and they're chronically homeless, and the services are available, but they're just not ready yet. And there are concerns like, if they're sleeping outside and it's really cold, are they going to be somebody that we're going to find, in a bad way? And so sometimes it does break your heart, especially when you see individuals that are in their mid to late 20s and they're struggling with severe alcoholism. And you think about the trajectory of what their life could look like if they don't decide to get treatment. And so some of that stuff is really heartbreaking. And calls with kids are always kind of tough too. But
and in both your professions, you do have to, develop a thick skin. However, we're still humans. I remember just briefly here, we did a meth house one day. We raided actually 2 meth houses, one across the street from each other. And I was at this particular one, and there was a young girl there, and real meek and real polite, and spoke, a hardcore meth addict, but spoke intelligently. And so it got to I had to put handcuffs on her. We were serving search warrants. She probably weighed 80 pounds. Yeah. She was just tiny. And at a certain point, I said, I have to get your ID. She's the farthest thing from a threat to me. Anyway, she said, oh, my wallet's in my pocket. So I grabbed it. And then I said, is it okay if I get your driver's license? Yep, it's in there. And I went to pull out her driver's license, and she said, I used to be really pretty. Oh, talk about a gut punch. And I've got her, she knew I was a male, she was a female, and she was self-conscious, and she knew I was going to see her driver's license picture, which was before she was a meth addict. And it didn't even look like her, but she was so conscious of what it had done to her. So, Tony, I'm guessing, knowing you've had some heartbreak moments out dealing in this special unit.
A number of times.
Yeah. Tell me about
as
those.
Part of the hot team, we did not, we weren't just handing out water bottles and blankets. We were working actively to get people housing, to get people their ID, to get people health insurance, to get them jobs. And we had several case studies where we worked. And when I say we, primarily it was the social workers on the team that were getting the community resources to them. And several people, we worked, and we finally got them housing. And unfortunately, once we got them housing, now they have 4 walls and a roof. However, they don't have any relationships. They have no one visiting. They don't even have basic cable TV.
Yep.
They're not outside in February, which is great. But then the people that we're celebrating and high-fiving that Jane Q homeless person is now housed. I mean, that's a victory. I mean, it's a tally for the good guys. And then we saw Jane Q homeless lady out on the street. And we would talk to her, Jane, what are you doing here? I missed my friends. I missed my friends. And after a while, they just continue going back, and then they start spending the night on the street again. Yep. And then they end up losing the apartment.
Yeah. So they build like a camaraderie among.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Oh my gosh! I didn't even think of that angle.
It's about relationships.
It's a peer, absolutely.
Yeah.
And when we have communications with people, and they're discussing, the things that are preventing them from staying in their apartment or staying in their condo or whatever, a townhome or a group home, the number one thing they say is, I'm lonely. I'm lonely. I'm just there. I have nothing to do.
Well, it's one of the worst, and I'm sure Chrissy could talk about this far better than I can, but it's one of the worst things for a human to endure is loneliness, isolation and loneliness. We're designed, in my mind, by God, to be around people, and we're not designed to live like an animal alone. And Chrissy, can you think of one of those cases? I'm going to put you on the spot here that just broke your heart. A specific case that just kind of. Maybe you're the first time. I know, I have a hard heart and I have a thick skin. My buddy can tell you that. But every once in a while, like this little gal that was the meth addict, just absolutely broke my heart. Can you think of any of those?
We actually had some siblings that were homeless, adult men. And they looked out for one another on the streets, homeless. Both of them struggled with mental health issues. They both struggled with addiction. And, one morning the brother found the other brother deceased. And that was really difficult because they took care of each other. It gave each of them some sort of purpose in life, like looking out for one another.
Absolutely.
And we were really concerned about the one brother, once his other brother passed away, we were worried, like, okay, how is he going to handle this? We're worried about him slipping even further into addiction. And again, they looked out for one another. So a lot of times when people are homeless, they're with somebody else for a level of protection.
Yeah.
To keep an eye on each other, especially for females. A lot of times they have somebody else with them to make sure that they're not taken advantage of or something happens to them.
Yeah, right on. So we're going to take a break and catch our breath and get into segment 2. We're going to continue the conversation after these messages from our local sponsors of the Big Rapids Buzz. You are listening to WBZX Big Rapids on B1039. You are listening to WBZX Big Rapids on B1039. I am Bruce Borkovich.
And I'm Chris Long.
Hi, Chris. How you doing this morning?
Good.
This has been a really neat show so far. And we both discussed at the break the need to bring these two professionals back again.
Oh, yes. I come from a different disposition and different mindset. And I definitely have had a change of heart slightly. On this whole thing.
Yep, that's good.
But I've never had these conversations with experts before.
You're expanding your world.
That's been happening a lot in the last year.
Well, we have
quicker and quicker.
Police officer Tony here and social worker Chrissy here to remind everyone, and we're talking about mental health, addiction, and homelessness, and in particular, we're talking about a special unit that the Grand Rapids Police Department has where they have partnered with social work professionals, and we're going to continue that. Chrissy, so tell me what a typical shift looks like, okay? It's Is there a typical time where you're typically working? I'm guessing in the evenings. Tell me about what's a typical shift.
Yeah. So first of all, there is no typical shift because every day is so different. But typically, I'm paired with any CIT trained officer, and we start the shift off in the morning, usually about 7 or 8. We go over if there's any mental health pickup orders, if any of that needs to be done for the day, if there's any referrals or anything critical or kind of looming from the night before. And then whoever I'm partnered with will look at the CAD and determine, what do we got to hit? Is there any trespassing calls, welfare checks, suicide threats? Today, for instance, we went to a couple suicide threats, somebody who had attempted suicide, ingested medication, and drank, an excessive amount of alcohol. We did a welfare check on somebody who was very paranoid. We followed up on a mental health pickup order. We collaborated with St. Mary's Hospital. So yeah, a typical day is non-typical.
Yeah.
Chrissy, could you touch on CIT?
CIT is crisis intervention training for officers, and it's a 40-hour a week or 40-hour training that they do, which gives them a little bit more training in working with mental health and substance use. So they do role-playing, scenario training, go over different mental health diagnoses that are more common that they're going to see on the street, and then talking about resources within the community.
Yeah.
So these officers kind of have a little bit more specialized training in terms of working with mental health and substance use.
Yeah. I'm a simple guy, and I tend to break things into simple analogies. And one of the things I learned over many years in law enforcement was that dealing with people in a mental health crisis and sometimes an addiction crisis, it's like you're showing up to a basketball game and someone has inflated that basketball to the maximum. If you dribble it, it'll bounce right out of the ceiling. And the mistake I made oftentimes as law enforcement officers, what would I do? I'd come up, put more air in that ball. Mm-hmm. I'd start putting pressure on them and thinking that, okay, my job is to come and take control of this situation.
Right.
This is how I do it. And it was just like putting more air in there, and that ball's either going to bounce out of the gym or it's going to explode.
Yeah.
And so that's sometimes you learn by hard knocks, because back in the day, we didn't have the training. There was just no awareness. So,
yeah.
Tony, a typical day from your perspective.
So, typical day on the homeless outreach team. As I had said, there were firefighters and also social workers and recovery coaches. So we knew where all the hot spots were. We knew where the downtown areas were. We knew which bridges and viaducts to check. We knew along the, we call it the Butterworth landfill, which is an area along Kent trails along the Grand River. We were on first name basis with a lot of these folks, and many of them, we would have months long interactions with them and only know them by their moniker, by their street name. And that was something that we did on purpose, because it was difficult being in uniform. Now, we were in a suppressed uniform. Mm-hmm. I was not in the typical type A full regalia, the Class A uniform. I was in a suppressed uniform, so a polo shirt and khakis. Still had my gun belt on me, mm-hmm. and still had body armor, but mm-hmm. It's not what you would typically see, and not your average police officer directing traffic or making traffic stops.
Yep.
I think that softened things up a little bit. But it was difficult because a lot of the people that we were dealing with, they have had negative interactions with law enforcement. They're accustomed to being hassled and told to pack up their stuff and leave. You're on private property or you're on public property. You can't be here. And they were not having good quality, resourceful type interactions with the police. So as a law enforcement officer, when I'm showing up with a firefighter and with a mental health worker, it was difficult to establish a rapport and maintain trust with them. And part of the things that we did with that is I would walk up and say, hey, my name is Officer Tony. What do you want me to call you? And a lot of people would say, you can call me Arkansas. You can call me Jimmy the Man. You can call me whatever.
Yep.
And
street names.
Yeah, straight monikers. And that was a step toward that trust. And it got to the point where I would save their phone numbers in my phone as Arkansas or Jimmy the Man. I knew who they were and I knew right where to find them, but I had no idea what their names were, because my goal out there on a daily basis was not to find out if they had warrants, not to find out what they had been done the night before. My job was what can I do to make your day better today? What can I do to move forward to get you housing? If you want housing, there are a lot of homeless folks. They don't want housing. They're perfectly content living the way that they're living.
But what's your immediate need? Might be a sandwich. It might be a bottle of water.
Yep. We did a lot of, we interacted with and liaisoned with street medicine, with MSU Street Medicine. So we would work with them, have them come out, a lot of foot issues, a lot of infection issues. Mm-hmm. You know, if you or I get a scrape on our foot or get a sliver on the bottom of our foot, that's not a big deal. We have tweezers, we have antiseptic.
Rubbing alcohol, exactly.
Yeah, we have Neosporin. We can handle that. It might be a little irritating for a day or two, but we can handle that. For a homeless person, that could turn into a full-fledged infection. That could turn into an amputation.
Sure.
Yeah.
Because they're not living in a clean, sterile environment. They're probably not bathing on a daily basis, and they don't have access to just basic first aid.
Yeah.
What tips, because you mentioned it about them being harassed or told to leave the property, what tips or advice would you give our listeners to further interactions that they might have with the homeless population, especially in Grand Rapids or even around here?
Can you clarify a little bit? Like if
do we ignore them?
If a panhandler is approaching them and asking for money, what do you do? Or if you're saying,
both,
I'm seeing somebody under a tarp, under an overpass.
Both.
Weather permitting, I would say if you have legitimate concerns about the climate, because it's February and it's 4 degrees outside and it's a -10 wind chill, I think you should. It's appropriate to call to say, "Can I have somebody check on this
For a
person?" I
welfare
mean, this is
check,
still a human.
911 or non-emergency?
Non-emergency.
Okay.
I would say non-emergency on that. We have all encountered, myself included, the aggressive panhandlers.
Yes.
It is absolutely an issue. And I will tell you, I would encourage, do not give them cash.
Do not give them
Why,
cash.
Tony? I know the answer, but tell everyone why. I mean,
I think I know the answer too.
And maybe, typically my experience has been is that not every time, but more often than not, it is to feed an addiction.
Correct.
They're going to buy alcohol or drugs with it.
I've seen it happen.
I'm not qualified to give that answer. What I am qualified to give is the answer that I've heard from people that I consider subject matter experts on homelessness. I've had the opportunity to work with people who have literally dedicated their lives to helping the homeless. And they will be the first ones to tell you, do not give any cash, do not give any currency. If you feel compelled to give them a bottle of water.
Yes.
If you feel compelled to do something, run through McDonald's and grab them.
Absolutely.
Or your leftover food while you're leaving and walking back to your car.
Or if you have a granola bar left over in your car.
I don't know if this is right or not. Chrissy can weigh in. But when I get people approaching me, listen, I'm a pretty strong Christian, and there's a parable about the poor, who shows up begging, and it's Jesus. And there are other references in the Bible about turning people away in need when in fact they could be an angel, and it's very spiritual for me. So I have a real issue with just turning away from people. So what I'll typically do to avoid the money thing, I'll say, what do you like to eat and drink? And the last time I did it, the guy wanted an iced tea and a bag of Cool Ranch Doritos. And I said, I'll be right back. Stay right here. And I went and got him. Now, is that going to change his life? No. And I'm not saying he was even hungry, but I just asked him, what do you want? Like right now, a little bit of instant gratification. It's not going to hurt you. Like, Chrissy, is that?
I'm sorry, Chris, to further answer your question, when someone is aggressive, I would say make direct eye contact and say, sir or ma'am, I'm not going to help you today. And then you continue on.
Okay. How would you know, or tips for the listeners to determine if someone's actually in need versus a scammer? Because I've been down to Detroit. We used to go down there all the time, every weekend.
Great
for
question.
games and stuff. And
if you're seeing somebody with a child, I would say that should prompt a 911 call. If someone, whether you think that they're using that child as like a tool or a mechanism to get more money, that needs to then CPS and people like Chrissy need to get involved in that, because that's not acceptable. I'm very comfortable saying if someone is approaching you and asking for money, there's a very good chance that money is going to be used to feed a substance abuse of some type. might be alcohol, it might be tobacco, it might be cocaine or heroin. There are, specifically for Grand Rapids, there are plenty of resources available for food and hydration, and there's really not an excuse to be hungry in Grand Rapids.
Yeah.
Big Rapids, I don't know. I don't know what the service is out there, but a lot of churches offer food banks.
How like, you being an officer, would you be able to tell the difference between the scammer who's taking advantage of the emotional part of that versus the person actually in need? Are you able to determine that?
In Grand Rapids, I can, because I know many of them.
Yeah.
And oftentimes they will hold the sign-ups that say, I'm a combat wounded veteran, please help.
And that's a scam?
One of the first times that I've encountered these guys, my first question, what's the date of your DD-214? And they'll just
That's
stare
a
at
good
you.
question.
And I learned this many years ago from a salty old veteran, that when you're dealing with someone who contends that they were in the military, you ask the very first question you ask them, what is the date of your DD-214? And for the listeners out there who have served in the military, they know
exactly.
That's the date of your discharge, that you're no longer basically property of the federal government.
Yeah.
And this salty old veteran in Mount Pleasant, Larry Davis, told me, it doesn't matter how drunk you are. It doesn't matter how tired you are. It doesn't matter how symptomatic you are. It doesn't matter. Any person who served in the armed forces will be able to tell you the day of their DD-214.
I like yours
Instantly.
better than mine. I used to ask just real quick, what was your MOS? That's your military occupation specialty. And then you'd get that video stare, that blank look. And then it was like, then I'd look at him like I'd look at my daughter when she was 7, give the dad look. And what
about the ones that have the animals with them? Like that's when I get sad. That makes me sound bad.
That doesn't sound very good.
That doesn't sound good. Didn't mean it that way.
Chris, you have that button that beeps things out, right? Can you push it once? Just push it. There you go. Thanks, Chris.
What about the ones with the dogs?
So, as part of the homeless outreach team, we also connected with people that specialized in helping dogs and cats that are homeless. They were a tremendous resource for us. Again, this is Grand Rapids specific, but those agencies in Grand Rapids would take your pet if you were going into some type of a substance abuse or something, and they would house the pet. Oftentimes, and I can have Chrissy speak more to this, that pet is the one last shred of a lifeline that they have.
I see. Yeah.
They're able to keep themselves somewhat stabilized because they know they have to care for the animal. Unfortunately, there's a flip side of that. Animals are not allowed, the pets are not allowed into any of the shelters. Unless you can get the dogs or the cat sanctioned as a service animal, which is incredibly difficult.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm not aware of any animals that have been certified in Grand Rapids as that this is a mental health or a therapy dog or an iguana that helps keep me pacified. Many people will identify that as such, but it's not sanctioned or certified by some type of a governing board. Chrissy, can you add to that?
Yeah. I'm not familiar with anybody that's actually had one put as a service animal. But a lot of times these people will feel like their pets are their children. And so they're going to do everything that they can to keep them with them.
And that's the ultimate irony. The one thing that is keeping them afloat is also the one thing that is preventing them from moving forward and getting resources.
Chrissy, how does it affect you personally to deal with the sadness and the despair that many people are experiencing? I know we're all trained to have thick skins and disassociate, but we're human beings. I have a suspicion that you got into social work not for the money, because of
that is correct,
of your compassion and your heart. And tell me, because sometimes we know this in police work, you can brush all this off and it's no problem, and I'm tough, and I've had people die in my arms, I've had children die in front of me, and you just pass it off. And then it can sneak up and get you years later or however. How is it affected you personally?
I think you really can't let it affect you, because I don't want it to affect the ability to do my job. And so I just have healthy ways of coping. And those are things like a healthy, active lifestyle,
exercise.
Running is a huge thing for me. Socializing. And then I just also have great peers and the officers that I work with. A lot of times we'll kind of debrief after these calls, like, hey, that was a really tough call, or holy crap, like, I can't believe we just saw that. There's some things, and then we'll kind of debrief it together, process it, and then you're kind of on to the next call. And so I think a lot of it is just having those healthy coping mechanisms, and then having a great, GRPD does have that peer support team, and a lot of the officers are very open to talking about kind of emotions and feelings and dealing with that stuff.
There's nothing like, the professionals are great, and, but there's nothing like discussing it with a peer. And in private, whether it's over a glass of wine or a beer or a glass of water or a meal or anything else, the professionals are great and they do a great job. But there's nothing, really like discussing it in front of a peer.
Sure, or just going car to car and processing a call and like, hey, what could we have done? Or that was a really difficult call, and just kind of looking out for one another.
Yeah, I get it. So this is going to be for both of you. Chrissy, let's stick with you. Why do you think addiction, mental health problems, homelessness, and so many those things are so intertwined, is so prevalent? Two-part question, is so prevalent right now. And in a perfect world, you're king, you're queen. And you have a guess at what any solutions might be? So why are these things so prevalent? And do you have any theories on solutions?
Yeah. So why are they so prevalent? I think people are more willing to talk about it now. I think there's not as much stigma, not as much taboo. More people are willing to say like, hey, I'm really struggling. They're not isolative about it. And there's so many more resources available and more education about what the symptoms are, where anxiety, for instance, people are thinking, oh, I'm having a heart attack. And it's like, no, you're having a panic attack.
Oh, yeah.
So there's just a lot more education, resources. People are more comfortable talking about it. Social media has helped in some ways in terms of like educating people on what these symptoms are and what they could be. In terms of solutions.
Oh, here it is. I'm not supposed to bang on the table, but this is a drum roll.
Actually, I think I have a drum roll around here.
Okay, before you answer this, Chris.
I don't know where it is.
Okay, well, Chrissy, talk to us.
I don't have a solution.
Right.
There really is no one-size-fits-all solution, and you really have to be individualized when you're working with a person, because mental health is so complex, and it could be compounded over years. It could be a brief episode. It could be mixed with trauma. It could be mixed with addiction. It could be mixed with legal issues. I mean, it's so difficult to really give a one-size-fits-all answer.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of nice with this job because we can take each call, dissect it, and then get that one person the services that they need.
That's what you're doing. It's the starfish. Remember the old thing about walking along the shore? There's a million starfish that washed up on shore, and the guy slowly reaching down and tossing one out, and some guy comes up. Well, that is so stupid. Do you think that's really going to make a difference? And as the guy tosses one, he says, it makes a difference to this one.
Yeah.
How's that for a sappy story? Are you crying a little bit? Do you need a little
don't
answer?
start crying.
Tony's
I don't
a
do
crier.
well with
Tony, do you need
people
a hug?
start crying.
Not yet.
Okay. I'm going to give you a hug when the show's done.
I'll do some therapy on the way home today.
You don't have enough time, Chrissy.
Are you actually tearing up?
No.
Oh, gosh.
Chrissy.
I was going to say, please don't. I don't do well with that.
I've known him longer than you, and I
Yeah.
know you're very bright, very well trained, but you don't have the time or the expertise to do therapy with this guy.
Fair assessment.
Yeah.
Tony, how about that question for you? Two-part. Why do you think? Because I have a theory that's a tiny piece of this, and you two might disagree with it. But why do you think addiction, mental health problems, homelessness is so prevalent? Number one, and you're king. Any ideas on how to fix it?
If I'm king for a day, everybody gets an ID. And if you lose your ID, you get a free ID. Everything starts with a picture license or a picture ID. your photo and your name on it. Everything starts there.
You're talking about
Everything.
not people that are in crisis, every single human being.
Every single human being. You get a picture ID. Not for government tracking.
Free.
There's no conspiracy there. Give them an ID and do not make them jump through so many hoops. And Chrissy can attest to this. Everything as far as getting resources begins with having a photo ID, proving who you are.
It's true.
Proving what your birthday is. Everything starts there. My theory, I mean, this is a layman, you know, I don't have the expertise on this, but they're compounding problems. You know, you have someone that is, they're exhibiting signs of mental health. And so they maybe start smoking marijuana. Certainly not suggesting that it's a gateway drug, just saying that's a coping mechanism.
It is.
When they're younger.
Oh, you should have heard my show a couple weeks ago. I just hammered marijuana.
Okay. So, all right. They try some of, you know, granddad's bourbon.
Yeah.
And I mean, they feel better. You know, they don't hear voices. They don't feel obsolete. They don't feel isolated.
How do they go from that to meth and cocaine and crack?
Great question, Chris. But how does the roofer go from being gainfully employed and loving his family, then he falls off a roof and breaks his back, and he's taking Vicodin, and his doctor prescribed Vicodin, and he gets a refill, and he takes Vicodin, he gets a refill, and he takes Vicodin, and then one day the doctor just says, you don't get any more Vicodin. And now you've got this roofer who he can't get out of bed, he can't pick up his kids, he can't change a diaper. He's literally
addicted.
He is addicted to Vicodin.
To Vicodin, but like, so they go and contact somebody and it's like, can you give me something that's similar?
Well,
it's an opiate.
Yeah.
I know, but like people just.
Yeah, you can start, you know, you're at a friend's house, you're rifling through the cabinet, the medicine cabinet, and then you can't find that. Oddly enough, it's easier to find heroin than it is sometimes to find pills, and a little bit cheaper. So people will start, you know, the addiction causes you to do things that you never thought you would ever find yourself doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is there any patterns that you've seen with who does what drugs? Is there any personality,
Not
introvert, extrovert, any
really.
past? There's no pattern.
It's just
That's
the
the
compounding
challenge.
problem. It's we have mild signs of mental health and mild symptoms, and then they start coping with a substance, or they withdraw from their family. They stop going to church. They break up with their boyfriend or their girlfriend. They're playing more video games. Maybe they're fishing too much. I don't know. I'm just using that as a funny example. And the next thing you know, then they get a traffic ticket, or they get picked up for trespassing, and now they've got a court appearance, and now they can't go to work because they lose their job because they put on probation. And it's one problem after another that compounds.
Very true. The quick story I told about the young lady addicted to meth, I had a great conversation with her, and Chris, this might help answer your question. She said she had a wonderful family. She had a sister. She had a great childhood. She had everything she needed. She had wonderful, loving parents. She had not one excuse or not one blame on how it happened. Now, I can tell you meth can be instantly addictive for some people. First time, it can be addictive. Statistically, only 2% of the people ever addicted to meth can overcome the addiction in their lifetime. It's that powerful of a drug. But so you could say, okay, a meth addict, you know, had a bad family, he was sexually abused, physically abused, poor, uneducated. You could go, but then you're going to find exceptions to it, which takes you right out of all the theories on how do we fix this stuff.
Bruce, we had a homeless male downtown, and I won't use his name, but at one point was excuse me, wildly successful attorney.
Oh.
He even argued in front of the Michigan Supreme Court at one point.
Wow.
He died on the streets.
And again, you know, you start to, as intelligent people, we draw these patterns. I think I got it. And then you run into the attorney, or you run into the young girl who, you know, I used to be pretty and had a wonderful family. And it's like, now where are we? You know,
Right.
So Tony and Chrissy, I want to ask you both this. So, there are people, and it's very legitimate. I think it's a legitimate question to say, okay, but I see some of these people, they talk intelligently, they walk and they move and they're capable. Why the employers are begging for employees? Why don't they turn their life around, go get a job, and live a real life?
Oh yeah.
Who wants to start with that? Chrissy,
I'll
you
let
want
you
to start?
with that
All right.
one. I want to hear
That
it.
just, again, shows how intelligent she is. Because, someone driven by their ego would say, well, I've got this, but no, I'm going to give it to you, Tony.
Sure.
Well done, Chrissy.
So great question. And one that, I myself have thought, go get a job. I think we've all seen, there are Facebook pictures out there of somebody panhandling underneath and maybe call it an Arby's sign where, the Arby's sign says help wanted.
Mm-hmm.
First step, go get a job. Okay. I don't have an ID. Second step, I go to my job interview and I tell my employer, hey, I really want to work, but I don't have an ID. Okay. How can I fill out my EID form?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Next step, employer says, love to hire you. However, I need your address. Well, I don't have an address. Then employer says, okay, we'd still love to hire you. Here's the uniform you have to wear. Also, just so you understand, we have a personal grooming and a health clause to work here at wherever. Well, I can't shower. My fingernails are dirty. I don't smell the best. Are you going to provide a shower facility for me to shower before my shift? Okay. Well, here at Bruce's Wicker Basket Incorporated, we only pay through direct deposit. So I need your bank account. Yeah. Well, I don't have a bank account. Yeah. Why don't you have a bank account? I don't have an ID. Why don't you have an ID? Well, I lost my ID because I got really drunk the other night and I got taken to the hospital. The paramedics lost it. Or last week I was robbed. Mm-hmm. They took my backpack, took my wallet. I don't have a social security card and I don't have a driver's license. Yeah. Okay, so now I'm trying to get a job. I want to work, but I have no ID and I have no social security card proving who I am, what my birthday is. I have no ability to cleanse myself to be presentable for my job. I have no way to launder my uniform, so I don't meet those requirements. You can't pay me because I don't have a bank account, and you won't pay me in cash. Some places have hired the homeless, and what they'll do is they'll pay them on a debit card in lieu of direct deposit. But I can tell you, the city of Grand Rapids, I'm required. I have to. My paycheck comes direct deposit.
Yep.
Yeah. That payroll.
It's not an option sometimes.
That's right. This is how we're going to pay you.
Yeah.
And I know I sound like the bleeding heart here, but the reality of it is there are so many obstacles. It is not just a matter of, look at this guy standing there, he could go get a job.
Yeah.
And the reality of it is that there are mechanisms in place that homeless person literally cannot go get a job.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Tony, the difference
How would you answer?
The difference between a bleeding heart and a realist is knowledge and education.
Right.
So if you're kind of ignorant to this situation, it's easy to say, it's that simple, why don't you get a job?
Correct.
When you've dealt with it on the street and you know all of the realities. I know you're not a bleeding heart liberal, but you know the realities. You just listed a dozen huge barriers.
Correct.
To answer the question. You're not making excuses for these people. You're just giving us a bunch of facts.
Right. And that's why I said, if I were king for the day, everybody gets an ID.
Yeah.
They get a picture ID with their name and their birthday on it.
Yeah.
So they can prove who they are, because you cannot apply for any type of disability benefits without an ID.
Yeah.
You cannot you can't apply for your birth certificate without an ID.
Yeah.
You cannot apply for your social security card without an ID.
Yeah.
You can't even get a library card most often.
Yeah.
Unless you can
Can't get a fishing license.
Cannot get a fishing license.
Without an ID.
Heaven forbid if those conservation officers
Oh,
show
those
up.
guys. Oh, my goodness gracious.
Liars and thieves, every one of them.
Terrible, terrible.
Did you want me to? So in terms of it's easy to look, if you're standing outside looking in, but a lot of times individuals are struggling with addiction and they can't maybe, get sober enough to go to a job interview, or they don't have anybody to watch their kids, or they don't have reliable transportation, or they're struggling with mental health issues. I mean, there's so many different variables that could be the reason why somebody isn't able to actually go get a job.
Yeah.
So,
And the answer isn't, you shouldn't have been addicted.
right. Yeah.
Well, that's true. Theoretically, you shouldn't have become addicted. The problem is, and for professionals like you, is that's what my basketball coach used to say is ancient history. Right now, we're dealing with these realities.
Yeah. And what we try to do is we try to come up with solutions the barriers, okay, you're struggling with addiction because you can't get a job, or, you can't get a job because of the addiction.
Yeah.
Let's work on the addiction, or let's work on getting you an ID, or what can we do to chisel away to help it, as opposed
Lowering
to
barriers.
just,
What would you say is the percent of homeless that go through the program, or in general that actually turn it around and become fixed, or
I would have no idea.
Yeah.
I honestly
just
don't
a
know.
random number based on your experience?
No
How
clue.
would you?
I wouldn't even want to speculate because I have no idea.
that would be really
Would it be
difficult.
high or
I should-
low? Or is it very, very low?
It's ever changing too. It's ever evolving. Sometimes people have housing,
But there
where
has
they
been
don't.
success stories.
Absolutely, 100%. Yes.
I would be comfortable saying the younger
Yes.
you are, the younger that person is, the younger they are when there is some type of an intervention from a social worker,
Yes.
from the firefighter, from a police officer, where we can get them away from any type of a high risk lifestyle.
Yeah.
I think the chances of success skyrocket.
Yes.
I think the longer you are entrenched in living homeless, the more challenging it is to get out of that situation. And I'll be the first one to say, I should have clarified this. Oftentimes, as I rattled off all those reasons why someone could not get a job, yes, that person has probably made choices to put themselves in that situation.
Yeah.
But the reality of it is not just it's not easy as just walking into Burger King or Arby's or McDonald's and saying, "Hey, I see a help wanted sign out there. Can I get a job?" It's not that simple.
Multifaceted.
Absolutely.
I will have to say that I definitely have. It's definitely changed my mind and opened my mind a lot, because I come from the side, a very different perspective on things. And yeah, wow, this has been a great conversation. And Bruce, we're gonna have to bring it back.
Well,
I think
that's
this has
what
been
I
one of the
was-
best shows we've had so
Yeah.
far.
Yeah, I'm hoping you two will be willing to come up in the sticks here again.
Sure.
And
And I'm hoping
visit with
that
us.
we can show that law enforcement and social work can work
Oh,
together.
it's huge.
And we both have the same goal.
Yeah.
And we're showing that we can do this, and we have
Yeah.
fun. There's good
Yeah.
camaraderie between us. And even though Tony didn't necessarily want to talk to me in the beginning,
Yeah, he's like that. He wouldn't talk to me for years.
he wouldn't make any jokes around me or
Yeah.
anything in
Have
the
you?
beginning.
But you've seen success come from this.
100%. Yeah, I'm very passionate about this program
And
what
improvements.
it's done, and even just the relationship between the two agencies has
Absolutely.
been fantastic.
So I've got to tell you, I needed to get a little info whether we had anything like this locally. So I called our sheriff, Brian Miller, who I have great respect for. Also, Brian is a very good friend, and asked, and they currently don't have anything like this, but he has forced me and threatened me to get your contact information. And I'm expecting, there's a chiefs meeting they have once a month with all the police chiefs here. And I'm guessing they are going to be very interested in having you come and speak at the chiefs meeting. And knowing Brian, he has a huge heart. This is going to resonate with Brian, and he's going to look at partnering with Ferris and the city. And
There'll be lunch provided, correct?
there'll be lunch.
We
provided.
should do this
Absolutely.
again. We should do this again, but with Brian
We could.
on with
Yeah.
these two.
We could. But Tony, Chrissy, thank you so
Yes.
much for coming.
Thank
This
you.
was our longest show we've ever done.
Yes.
Jen is going to be throwing
She's
stuff
gonna be
at
mad.
both of us. She's not going to be real happy with us.
Oh well.
But besides thanking the two of you, we have to thank our sponsors. We have to
Yes.
thank the Pet Boutique, Paris Creek Jewelry. Hi, Corey. Purely Clean Services, the Barrington Firearms Training Center, 911 Restoration, Gilbert's Carpet Plus Color Tile, Benton Baker of Big Rapids, and Sue Bean at Big Rapids Realty. You have been listening to the Big Rapids Buzz at WBZX, Big Rapids on B1039. This is Bruce Borkovich.
And Chris Long.
Good morning.